Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 7th of March 2014. My name's Chris Nitzo and tonight we're talking two tropical lows that are both likely to form into tropical cyclones. The first one we've been talking about for weeks. The second one we only started talking about it a couple of days ago, and it might actually beat the Coral Sea one into becoming a tropical cyclone. So let's have a look at both of them. Here's where they both are. This is the first one, Tropical Low 1 and Tropical Low 2. Now, which one becomes Gillian and which one becomes Haiti, we don't know yet. So it's a bit of a race against the clock for both of these systems. This one will push southwest towards the Queensland coast. This one will push southeast towards the Queensland coast. They should both hit the Queensland coast or at least get very close to it, especially in Tropical Low 2. There is still some doubt as to whether it'll hit the coast at all. But if we just look quickly at the expected tracks on both these systems, Tropical Low 1, we can see on the Bureau of Meteorology site expecting it to become Category 1, possibly even Category 2 on landfall, and strike the coast somewhere near Weipa, with the maximum winds going to be to the north of the centre of the system, in response to some fairly strong monsoonal flow directly into the system. So expecting it to hit on the Sunday night and into Monday morning. Now, whether it goes further east and crosses the east peninsula coastline and then pushes south, we're not sure, or whether it'll track southwards along the west peninsula or just inland of the west peninsula southwards and then eventually southwest, we're not sure of that either. But folks, this is generally the track that's pretty widely accepted on most model guidance, and Category 1 is what most model guidance suggests this will be, so the Bureau being a little bit aggressive there in the development of the system, and that's probably not that far-fetched because it is going to lie in a very favourable area for development as well on its approach to the coast. So even though it's probably slightly more aggressive than most of the guidance suggests, it's certainly not out of the realms of possibility. The latest one from the Bureau of Meteorology for the East Queensland coast, and we see a very large, don't be fooled, even though the grey area looks smaller here, the scale is way different. We're talking 500 kilometres, so we're talking an error margin here of about 700 or 800 kilometres out to day 2 and 3. So we're looking at a huge error margin. Now, the reason being, and I'll show you the model guidance on this, there's models that keep it well east of this line here, the 150 east line, and there's models that hit the coast north of Cairns. So really there is that big a spread on this guidance that this forecast track is not very confident at all. But we see that the system is likely to attain Category 1 status. There is likely to be a little bit of a limitation on its development, at least initially, because it's such a broad low-level circulation. It looks more like a trough than a low. We were hoping that that was going to stop, and it did show signs of actually tightening up overnight and early this morning, but then once the ASCAT pass went through earlier this morning, we saw that that was nothing but a bit of a fallacy. It was still a fairly elongated low-pressure system, and so until it tightens up, until it stops being an oval shape and starts to become a circle at the surface, we are not going to see rapid development of this system, despite the fact that it's going into some beautiful conditions in this area here along its track. We can't see it really intensify until it forms that circle on the surface. Anyway, it is expected to do that eventually, so sometime on the Sunday we expect it to become a tropical cyclone, and then sometime on the Monday or late Sunday night we expect it to hit the coast. Interestingly, we're expecting them to hit the coast, this one and the other one, around about the same time on the same day. Now, I don't know how many times that's ever happened in Queensland, but I can't imagine it's been many over the past 100 or so years, so that's quite a significant little feature of these two twin systems. So if we assume the most likely scenarios, tomorrow we're going to see that low deepening in the northwestern Gulf of Carpentaria. We're going to see the tropical low in the Coral Sea deepening. Most of the rain remains offshore. Some of the rain starts to hit the coast around Cairns. Some lighter stuff all the way down to about Mackay or Serena, but that's fairly light rain at that point in time. It's Sunday where things get a little bit more interesting, as we see the system tracking a lot closer to the coast we see generally very moderate to heavy falls, particularly heavy falls on the Central Coast and Whitsundays region, and we also start to see that low in the Gulf of Carpentaria pushing eastwards, and we start to see some moderate falls hitting the coast in the Northwest Peninsula as well. So anywhere Cairns south to St. Lawrence looking at some moderate to heavy falls on Sunday, and anywhere Weipa northwards is looking at moderate to heavy falls on Sunday as well. Some isolated stuff around the northwest top end, also some isolated stuff around the Kimberley, and possibly even the inland Pilbara might see a storm or two on the Sunday. As we head to Monday, we continue to see the system. Now this is where it gets very sketchy and patchy, whether we see this rainfall pushing further south or whether we see it just perched on the Central Coast and Whitsundays. Once again, moderate to heavy falls anywhere from about Townsville down all the way, according to this guidance, all the way down to the Hervey Bay region. But folks, just be aware that this is very, particularly the southern extent of this, very varied depending on the model's guidance. So at this stage I'd say it's a safe bet to look at moderate to heavy falls from Ingham south to maybe St. Lawrence. Any further south will be very dependent on what happens with the tropical low, but you can pretty well take it to the bank that Monday you're going to see some moderate to heavy rain from about Ingham, particularly from about Townsville, say, to St. Lawrence. Now over the northern peninsula, the tropical low makes landfall, so we see moderate to heavy falls across the northern peninsula, and on the Tuesday those falls drift back to the south as the tropical low most likely will move back to the south on the West Peninsula coastline. But there is also another school of thought that says the tropical low pushes off the east Queensland coast and somehow creates a situation here, a Fujiwara effect, with the other tropical low or cyclone that's hitting the east Queensland coast, and both of those seek to create moderate to heavy falls of rain across the Queensland coast. Once again, the most favoured area on the Tuesday is Townsville south to St. Lawrence. So if we look at a total 4-day rainfall totals, we see generally moderate to heavy falls on the northern peninsula, particularly the northwest peninsula, and we see moderate to heavy falls pretty well everywhere from Cairns south to south of St. Lawrence, but really the intense rainfall will likely lie from about Townsville through to Serena, is where we're looking at the really intense rain lying. So just to the south of wherever the low or cyclone crosses. The 4 days after that, we're going to see still a continuation, particularly the first couple of days of that 4-day period, of possibly some moderate to heavy falls on that central coast of Whitsundays or the Herbert Lower Burdekin coastline, and then eventually those falls push off out into the ocean or into the Coral Sea. We may see some moderate to heavy falls developing on the north tropical coast around Cairns, but really when we're starting to get out into this time frame, it's dependent on how this interaction takes place, and if this interaction takes place between the Gulf low, if it pushes this way, and the Coral Sea low pushing this way. If they interact, we could see moderate to heavy falls anywhere on the coastline from St. Lawrence through to just north of Cairns, Port Douglas. Now, if it doesn't interact, so if that low doesn't push off the east coast and pushes further to the south, we're going to see big rain here in the southeast Gulf, and that's because the tropical lower cyclone in the Gulf then will be lying in a very weak steering environment for an extended period of time. So once again, just like Tropical Cyclone Fletcher back in the day, we could be seeing some very heavy rain over a prolonged period here in the southeastern Gulf, but that is too variable at the moment to talk too much at length about. So folks, that's pretty well it in 9 minutes. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about what they're looking like now and the future of the systems according to models, keep watching. Otherwise, you won't miss much if you look away now. Thanks for watching us, and for those sticking on, let's get into it. Okay, so here is our tropical low located out in the Coral Sea. And we see a lot of outflow here to the south. This cirrus cloud that was been all over North Queensland and Central Queensland is the outflow from all the thunderstorm activity associated with the low and the monsoon trough. And basically that's a really good thing, because it's going to allow that thunderstorm activity to keep growing and building, and then that outflow will allow it to escape, which is fantastic. So if we look at upper level divergence over the top of this, we see some really high values, which is very good. overall the steering flow. Now the steering flow at the moment is caught between south-southeast and west-northwest, and overall what we're seeing is basically a battle coming from a steering flow that's trying to push the system that way and a steering flow that's trying to push the system that way. And because the system is fairly surface based and it doesn't really have much height to it, despite all the thunderstorms you're seeing, the actual system itself is not stacked on top of itself. And so what we're seeing is that the influence of the surface ridging is winning out, and the system is pushing more in a west or west-southwest direction. But if the system starts to develop a little bit of height and starts to stack itself, and so what we mean by stack itself is we mean that the surface circulation, the mid-level circulation, the upper-level circulation, all on top of each other. And if it starts to do that, it'll start to come under the influence of the upper-level high that's located between Solomon Islands and Fiji, that has been there for a number of days now, and we've been talking about it for a number of days now. It will become the major steering influence and push the system in a more southerly direction if it intensifies. Now, if it doesn't intensify and remains a very weak low, the chances are that it's just going to keep pushing westwards. Now, if it does that, it's going to hit the coast around Cairns, but it's going to hit the coast as a very, very weak low. Now, if it develops that height and that vertical stacking, we will see it pushing in a lot further to the south. And therein lies why we have such a massive error margin on the track map between this area here and this area here is our error margin. And while our most likely track is into there, there is obviously the option, if it stays low, if it stays weak, to push further to the west and further to the north. If it gets much stronger, there's an option there for it to push a little bit further to the south. So if we look at wind shear is now starting to decrease. This is our 20 knot range here of wind shear, and we can see that it's now lying in less than 20 knots, and it's tracking overall in a southwest or westerly direction, so it's going to be tracking into moderate shear. We thought the conditions would have been ideal, but what's happened is this upper level high has perched itself just to the east of the surface circulation, and because of that, the really, really weak vertical wind shear is located southeast of the system. Now, there is signs in model guidance that weak shear will build westwards, so we won't have as much shear as it's showing here on in the next 24 to 48 hours. But at this stage, it is still battling some moderate wind shear. Sea surface temperatures, just showing you that there is absolutely no issue with regards to sea surface temperatures until the system gets south of about Rockhampton. We don't have an issue with sea surface temps. Dry air, however, is an issue. The system is pushing into a region of fairly dry air just off the coast of Queensland, and if this dry air starts to wrap around the circulation, it will limit its potential to develop. The good news, of course, is that you can see all of this really moist air up here, and that's all associated with a very active monsoon trough. And so as the system pushes southwest, so too does the monsoon with it. So we actually have this moist air is pushing in the southwest direction with the low. So it's not as if the dry air is being able to wrap in around the circulation, because all of this moist air is pushing southwest with the low, or advecting southwest with the low. So if we look at the latest GFS model guidance, and we can see that overall we have a crossing around Townsville modelled by this particular model suit, but we also have options all the way north to Port Douglas, or just south of Cooktown in fact, and all the way south to not even making landfall. You can see this model member here not making landfall and pushing back out to the east-northeast, but overall we have anywhere from about Port Douglas all the way down to about Proserpine in terms of landfall potential according to the GFS model. If we look at the Canadian CMC model, once again the ensemble mean suggests a track right on Townsville. However, we have crazy divergence here in the model guidance, anywhere from about Princess Charlotte Bay all the way south to about Bowen, all the way out east of 150 degrees east. So way too much variability to place too much emphasis on the CMC model. It is really struggling with this particular scenario. And the cyclone barrier is in full swing on the UK Met model. We see basically every single bit of model guidance from the UK Met, except for one or two members, or 3 members, sorry, pushing the system pretty well due south, a little bit further west, then due south, and then pushes it way out to the east there, well off the Queensland coastline. So the UK Met does not love us one little bit. So we see over here pretty good agreement, believe it or not, though, that the system won't hit the coast. So that's why we've got such a big error margin. And you see this little kink here in the model guidance or the ensemble mean. And if you have a look at the Bureau of Meteorology's track, and you have that same kink in the guidance right in here, and that's to account for the UK Met, which has the system pushing way out here further to the east, not making landfall. So look, if that verifies, we're not going to see too much effect on the coast. At this stage, the UK Met remains a fairly large outlier though to the east. The problem with it is that the UK Met is number 2 in the world when it comes to modelling tropical cyclones, so we can't dismiss it outright as being an error or an error-ridden model. We need to pay some attention to it just because of its stats. If we now look at the Gulf of Carpentaria system, we see that the system overall is expected to get close to the West Peninsula coast. There is still doubt there as to whether it'll hit the coast or whether it'll curve back to the southwest under a developing upper or mid-level ridge across central Australia. And if it does so, expecting to hit it on the south or southwestern Gulf of Carpentaria. Now, if it escapes that ridging, it'll likely hit the northern parts of the peninsula and then push south in a south or southeast direction from there, and could actually exit the eastern peninsula, as some of the guidance shows here. And if that happens, there may be that interaction I spoke about at the start of the video between it and the tropical low or tropical cyclone in the central or Herbert Lower Burdekin coastline of Queensland. If we take a look at the latest from the Bureau of Meteorology Access Regional Model, this model doesn't do too badly. The Access G model does horribly, but this model from the Bureau does actually not too bad. So let's have a look at it. 5 AM tomorrow, getting quite low there, 998 hectopascals, getting pretty close to a TC. 996 5 PM tomorrow, located basically off the coast of Cooktown, and we see this other low in the northern Gulf of Carpentaria. As we head to 5 AM Sunday, we see that the system basically stalls off the Queensland coast, which is what a lot of the modelling does do with it. And we see this other one hitting the tip of the Cape. As we head to 5 PM Sunday, we see the tropical low now pushing in a southerly direction at 992 hectopascals, so it's likely to be a cyclone by that stage. And we see the other low has already hit land and is on the East Peninsula coastline 5 PM Sunday. At 5 AM Monday, we see the Queensland cyclone, the Coral Sea cyclone, located basically directly east of Townsville and pushing towards the coast between Townsville and Bowen. And the other low is now located off the East Peninsula. If we follow then in 3-hour timestamps, by 8 AM Monday, the Coral Sea or Queensland lower cyclone has hit the coast somewhere between Townsville and Bowen, and on this one here has now deepened significantly to 994 hectopascals and is pushing in a southerly direction as it hits the coast somewhere around the Cooktown region. Now, there is interestingly possibly going to be an interaction between the two, modelled by this and the European model. So let's have a look at what that interaction might be. So here is Sunday night on the European model. We see 2 lows or 2 cyclones at that point in time. We see one located here north of Weipa. We see the other one located just off the coast of Townsville on Sunday night. As we head to Monday morning at 10 AM, we see that the Townsville system has made landfall. We see that the Weipa system is now off the East Peninsula coastline, much like Access told us it will be. So Access and the Euro are very, very close on this one. And then what we're going to see is we're going to see these two systems have a little bit of a play around, and this one halts its movement, this one continues moving, and what we end up getting is a whole new or basically a positioning of a centralized circulation here. They sort of merge, believe it or not. So let's focus and let's look at this one through the period. This is 1 PM. You see this one in Townsville has just stalled over the top of Townsville. This one is stalling up around the Cape region. The Townsville one remains in Townsville. This one continues pushing southeast. Really weak winds in between, so they form basically a big trough line now between them on Monday night, and then what happens is that the Townsville system becomes a non-event or becomes a non-system, and we actually see this trough line now, and this is now becoming the dominant circulation as we head to Tuesday morning. And really somewhere in between where the Townsville system was and where the Cape system is where the new one forms around about Cairns. Now it could actually be named the same system, if that the same one as the Gulf, if it does reform into a tropical cyclone. And then from there we see it intensify off the coast between Cairns and Townsville, and eventually the upper level westerly winds will push it away and off the coast in the longer term. So in the meantime though, it's dumping heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps of rain all along the southern, particularly to the south of the system. So we're going to see significant rainfall totals if this scenario pops up as the European suggests, and we're going to see those significant rainfall totals over a number of days. So we'll probably see the start of the rain. In fact, let's just have a look when we'd be expecting the start of the rain, because I'm sure people will be interested in that. 24 hours time, so Saturday morning we might start to see some showers along the North Tropical coastline. As we head to Saturday afternoon, we're going to see some more moderate rainfall developing along the North Tropical coast north of about Cairns. Some isolated showers on the North Tropical coast, the wet tropics coastline, but really everywhere else is pretty dry until about 7 to 10 p.m. Somewhere between 7 and 10 p.m. that rain starts to hit the coastline tomorrow, and moderate to heavy rain starts to hit the coastline tomorrow. So sometime around the Cowboys game or just after the Cowboys game is when it all happens. So if you're going to the Cowboys, make sure you pack a poncho. Now on the Sunday morning we see that moderate to heavy rain continuing on that coastline. Anywhere sort of from Cairns south to Townsville is where it's all happening there initially. Now as the low starts to push in a more southerly direction, we see that heavier rain spreading southwards as well, and now starting to incorporate Mackay on Sunday afternoon, and still remaining fairly moderate to heavy around Townsville throughout the entire Sunday, but really weakening out. Once the low is south of you, you're not going to see too much from it, and you can see here all the rain around Cairns has weakened out. So Sunday night, heaps of rain around Townsville, heaps of rain from Townsville all the way down to Serena, and we just continue to see that rain pummeling that same area of coastline for an extended period of time, then from Monday and then into Tuesday and then even into Wednesday. It's just non-stop, relentless heavy rain in that entire region. Eventually on Tuesday and Wednesday the rain starts to spread back north again, but that's all dependent on whether we get that interaction or not with that new Gulf low if it pushes eastwards. So that's the Euros take. And if we take a look at the GFS just to see how they compare, once again tomorrow morning not much rain, maybe some just touching the North Tropical coast north of about Cairns in the morning. Then as we head towards the afternoon and now the evening hours, so this is between 7 and 10 p.m, you can see that the GFS keeps most of the rain offshore, doesn't start the rain on the coast. Maybe it starts at around the Whitsundays or Bowen region around 7 to 10 p.m, but really it doesn't start it on the coast, the heavy stuff, until overnight Saturday and into Sunday. So that's the GFS is a little bit slower in pushing that really heavy rain onto the coast. Also with the GFS, it misses out a lot of the rain around Cairns, and most of it sort of hits Innisfail southwards or Cardwell southwards, and so we see some extreme rainfalls in and around that Cardwell to Townsville area initially, and then spreading south to Mackay as we head later into Sunday. You can see here some massive totals here Sunday afternoon on the GFS model guidance, and then those totals just continue for the same area, Townsville to Mackay, for an extended period of time. You can see here, look at it, just relentless rainfall in the same area. Starts to push a little bit further to the south on the Monday, and then into the Monday afternoon and night. And interestingly, the GFS model, you can see the low here in the Gulf of Carpentaria. It does not push it eastwards off the Cape York Peninsula. It keeps it on the Western Peninsula coastline. And so we're going into Tuesday, Wednesday, and we're just seeing relentless rainfalls all across northern Queensland. Unfortunately, those rainfalls are not extending much past central Queensland, past about Gladstone or St. Lawrence, in fact. So anywhere south of that is not going to see too much out of this whole event. The only threat of that happening is if the system pushes a lot further south than it's expected to, but at this point in time that seems remote. That seems like a remote possibility. Really, if it's going to hit the coast, it's going to do so more than likely north of Mackay, more than likely south of Cairns. In terms of wind impacts, well, basically we're going to see gale force winds in offshore waters from tomorrow morning, and as we head to tomorrow afternoon, we're going to see those gale force winds getting still on offshore waters, but getting a lot closer, particularly around the Cairns area. We could be starting to see gale force winds developing, and also in the north and Gulf of Carpentaria, we're going to see gales developing. As we head towards tomorrow night, those gales start to push very, very close to the coast on the central coast and also the North Tropical Coast. As we head to Sunday morning, we see those gales encroaching the Townsville coastline as well, although the Townsville coastline is a little bit more sheltered in a southeasterly stream. On the Sunday 10 a.m. period, we see that those gales are well and truly now onto the Queensland coast, and also we're starting to see gales developing in and around the Torres Strait Islands and the far northern peninsula in the northwesterly stream, and we actually see gales far removed here from the centre of the system, possible because of a tight pressure gradient, and that's well south of Mackay. In fact, we're seeing those gales between Mackay and St Lawrence, even though the system remains between Townsville and Cairns. So interestingly, that the gale radius could extend a long way further to the south, and that's more because of a pressure squeeze rather than the system itself. But really, folks, then gales just continue relentless in the Townsville coastline and the Central Coast and Whitsunday's coastline for an extended period of time. And once the Cape system, if it does push offshore, we could be starting to see gales once again forming when these two systems merge and form one larger system. We'll see gales redeveloping, particularly to the south, and possibly developing quite quickly on the Wednesday. And you can see here some really intense winds there, 35 to 40 knots. All right, folks, that's all we have time. Oh, let me just show you a couple of the other models that I haven't shown you yet. So this is the experimental FIM model, and we can see the Gulf low pushing onto the coast. This is by Sunday morning, and also we see the system just here off the Townsville coastline on Sunday morning as well. Most of the heavy rain obviously to the south of that. Then as we head to Monday, we see the Gulf system pushing eastwards onto the Princess Charlotte Bay area, and we see the Coral Sea system has hit the coast around about Bowen. And then by Tuesday, the whole thing turns into a big mess, and one big system develops, or one, not big as in strong, but just broad system develops, where these two systems merge around a central point to the north of Townsville. So that's very similar to what the Euro and the Access model have been showing. The NavGem or NoGAPS model, not very accurate, but we do need to show it to you. It pushes the system directly south and then southeast, and also the Gulf system hits the West Peninsula and starts to push back to the south-southwest along the West Peninsula coastline. So could see some really big rainfalls if this scenario happens for the West Peninsula. Once again, Kawanyama had some massive rain late in January, early in February. We could see the same type of scenario there if the system is slow moving and just sits there for a while. And I've already shown you the UK Met, and this is just the overall track of the actual member instead of the ensemble. So you can see here the system in the Gulf doesn't hit the Queensland coast, and you can see the other one doesn't hit the Queensland coast. So there's the cyclone repellent is in full swing for Queensland on the UK Met model. So let's hope, because we do need some rain, let's hope none of this scenario happens. We want to see this one hit the coast. We want to see this one hit the coast. We want to get some rain out of both of them. And at this stage, they don't look like they're going to be too intense anyway. Alright folks, now that's all we've got time for. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow night. Oh, by the way, sorry, tomorrow night our video will not be on at night. We will put a video up around halfway through the day. I have rugby league commitments tomorrow night, so that will not be happening tomorrow night. So tomorrow's video, sometime about halfway through the day. Thanks for watching again. Good night.